Welcome to the Bluffton Biblecast. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the righteous shall live by faith. But what does a life of faith look like? Join us as we meditate on the wisdom literature of ancient Israel and the teachings of the apostles of Jesus Christ. This week we explore the book of James. Thanks for joining us. I'm Sean Lehman, and I'm here with Steve Ringer and Javon Steffen, with Lisa Lehman as our audio aficionado.
So guys, talk to me about James, this week's reading. What did you think?
Well, he's very direct, not much fluff, and some painful truths for a start.
Yeah, well, I love this book for a lot of different reasons. You know, I've heard it said that the book of James speaks the least about Jesus, but speaks the most like Jesus. But I do have one question.
What's that?
Well, do we really know, which James is the actual author of James?
Yeah, it's a bit vague. We can't know for sure because it's not written, but most scholars believe that it was James, the brother of Jesus, also called James the Just. There are other options out there, but not with near as much support.
What about when it was written?
There are a few thoughts, but most accept traditional authorship that dates between the mid-40s or the early 60s AD, shortly before the death of its author.
Okay, so we're talking 10 to 30 years post-crucifixion.
Exactly. Going through James felt a little bit like reading the Proverbs to me, actually.
Oh, really? How so?
There's so many little nuggets of goodness. Even the Bible Project mentions how there's 12 various topics to consider, and they are all even alluded to just in chapter 1.
Okay, wow. Well, where do we start?
So, Steve, just go with me here. Do you listen to podcasts other than this one, of course?
When I get the chance. There are some really good ones out there.
It can be a great way to learn in our downtime or when we're doing daily tasks. The host teaches us something they have a passion for or have studied deeply.
Hey, that kind of sounds like our podcast.
For sure. Thanks for listening. Wisdom from people, any teacher really, can get skewed, especially when we are passionate. There's a few pitfalls James points out contrasting human wisdom from above.
I could see that. Let's run through them together.
So, there's the scarcity mindset, where there's only so much time and energy that we have to devote to learning a specific hobby or skill, and as a person, we can get overwhelmed.
Yeah, for sure. But that contrasts with God's wisdom, which is generously given, like he says in chapter 1, verse 5.
Exactly. Like a flower or tree spreading its seed, one flower or pine cone provides exponential increase. Also, in our ordered culture, rules and facts can easily overshadow a graceful and merciful mindset. We can lose sight of the person.
You know, I've noticed podcast hosts can get very passionate and a bit pushy with political figures, celebrities, or anyone with influence.
Right. Okay, so you see wisdom from man looking just a little bit different from the wisdom from above.
Oh yeah, there is no contest. James teaches wisdom from God, and the wisdom that we must shoot for is a much higher bar.
Such a high bar. You're right, Sean. To give generously, to let mercy triumph over rules, to keep our words in check, or it can really derail a lifestyle completely. And James used a really cool analogy. He visualizing the rudder of a ship as our tongue. Just think about how drastically that can affect our course of life.
Yeah, one ill-intentioned conversation and we may end up drifting in Cuba.
But kind of true. I'm around a lot of good people, but we all fall to tendencies like sarcasm, boasting, even passive-aggressive comments when we're frustrated.
James points out that we have a war within us. Our passions are fighting to win out. Then he walks us back to a place of discipline and reminds us that the wisdom we should be shooting for is pure and peaceful, gentle, open to reason, full of mercy and good fruits, impartial and sincere.
And don't forget to also be peacemakers. A harvest of righteousness is sown in peace by those who make peace. The next time we ask for God's leading, it might be helpful for us to stop by James 3, verse 17.
Now, guys, let's dive into another key theme in the book of James. Real faith is inseparable from actions.
This is such a significant topic. The relationship between faith and works is something most of us wrestle with at some point.
Yeah, that's right, Javon. And when we talk about faith, we're not just referring to intellectual belief or warm feelings. It's much more than that.
That's for sure. Today, we'll look at the often debated tension between Paul and James on faith. Javon, can you read Romans 3:28, and Sean, follow up with James 2:24?
Romans 3 verse 28 says, "Therefore we conclude that a man is justified by faith without the deeds of the law."
Yeah, and James 2:24 states, "You see then how that by works a man is justified, and not by faith only."
You know, at first glance, it seems like Paul and James contradict each other, doesn't it?
It can, but maybe it's because we're not considering the context.
Yeah, I think that's right, Sean. There's a principle in interpreting Scripture. Every passage must be understood in its context. Paul and James weren't contradicting each other. They were speaking to different audiences with different issues. So we need to look at their words through the lens of their specific circumstances.
So, while they both talk about faith, Paul and James seem to approach it from different angles. Paul often emphasizes faith as the root of our relationship with God. For example, in Romans and Galatians, he shows how faith made Abraham right with God, referencing Genesis 15:6, where it says, "He," or Abraham, "believed in the Lord, and he," God, "counted it to him for righteousness."
Right. Whereas James seems more focused on the fruit of that faith, how it shows up in our lives. He also mentions Abraham, but highlights Genesis 22, where Abraham's faith is demonstrated by his willingness to sacrifice Isaac.
Exactly. It's like Paul is talking about the root, the foundational trust and belief, and James is focused on the visible evidence of that belief. Their views are actually complementary.
Does the timing and audience of their letters play any role here?
That's a good point, Javon. James's letter was written much earlier and addressed people who thought they could claim faith without works. Paul, on the other hand, was writing to address people who thought they could earn righteousness through works of the law. So both were clarifying different misunderstandings about faith.
It's like Paul is saying, you can't earn faith through the law, while James is adding, but real faith isn't just empty words. It has to show up in your life.
Great point, Sean. They're looking at faith from two sides of the same coin.
And it's key to see that neither of them excludes the other's point. Paul even says in Galatians 5:6 that what matters is faith working through love. And in Ephesians 2, he writes that we're created in Christ to do good works. So Paul also acknowledges that true faith leads to actions.
And James makes this clear in James 2:26 when he says faith without works is dead. It's such a vivid image. Faith without action is like a body without spirit, lifeless. Real faith isn't just head knowledge or feelings. It's active and transformative.
Yeah, real faith, the kind both Paul and James describe, isn't just intellectual assent. It's not just believing in facts. It's something that changes us. If faith doesn't impact how we live, then it's no better than the faith of demons.
And that's really the core of this theme. Real faith is inseparable from actions. Paul and James aren't contradicting. They're harmonizing the idea. Faith starts as the root, but it grows into the fruit of action, of a life transformed.
And maybe that's the takeaway for us today, to consider where our faith shows up in our lives. Are we truly living out what we believe? Listeners, pay attention to the many ways we can demonstrate our true faith by our actions as we read through the book of James.
We really should take a look into another principle that James teaches. And I say really should, because if I'm being honest, my flesh just loathes this.
I think I know where you're going with this. Sure.
Are you talking about counting it all joy when you fall into trials of many kinds?
Yes, you nailed it. Patience and perseverance. Not really exciting words for somebody with ADHD.
That's probably true of most of us, ADHD or not.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. it's pretty much human nature to want what we want when we want it.
That's for sure.
Yep.
Many people have probably memorized that verse that you referenced, Javon. Count it all joy when you fall into diverse temptations, knowing this, that the trying of your faith worketh patience. But let patience have her perfect work, that you may be perfect and entire, wanting nothing. And for good reason. It's a great couple of verses to have stored away. But James really has a lot more to say on the issue than just that.
Yeah, another popular verse is verse 12 of chapter 1. Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he is tried, he shall receive the crown of life that God hath promised to those that love him.
Yeah, that's another good one. He also talks about being unwavering, not tossed about like waves of the sea. He talks about being slow to speak, talks about being doers and not hearers only, being patient for the coming of the Lord, waiting for the early and latter rain. I don't know what age James was when he wrote this. I kind of picture him as a wise old grandfather figure telling an eager, headstrong young man, now, let's not be too hasty.
I like that thought, Sean, and I know what you mean. When I read James, I can feel similar messages even when James is not speaking directly about having patience or persevering. It's like it's a background theme that's woven into most of his teachings.
You know, that's really insightful, Javon. Can you give us an example of what you're talking about?
Well, James talks about providing clothes or food to a hungry or naked brother or sister. He talks about esteeming the poor equally with the wealthy. He warns against being presumptuous. It's like everything that James instructs requires going an extra mile, or going out of your way, letting others ahead of you. Not really things you would consider doing if your goal was to get ahead in the world.
Yeah, that's well said.
I really like verses 17 and 18 from chapter 3, and I feel like they sum up what we're talking about. I especially like the way it's worded in the NLT. The wisdom that is from above is first of all pure. It is also peace-loving, gentle at all times, and willing to yield to others. It is full of mercy and the fruit of good deeds. It shows no favoritism and is always sincere. And those who are peacemakers will plant seeds of peace and reap a harvest of righteousness.
Thank you for joining us today as we explored key themes from the book of James. First, we highlighted the wisdom from above, found in James 3:17. Next, Steve discussed the balance between Paul and James's perspectives, how faith and works complete each other. Finally, Sean touched on patience through trials, encouraging us to find joy and go to the extra mile in challenging times. We look forward to having you with us next time as we enter the book of 1 Peter.